Hello, I'm Kevin Smith, and on behalf of more than 500 churches in the Baptist Convention of Maryland and Delaware, I want to welcome you to Baltimore and Ethnos 2019. We are excited to partner with Dan Hyun and the brothers and sisters that are laboring with him as we come together and think about what did Jesus mean when he said, love your neighbor. He answered that when he was asked, teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to love God and to love your neighbor. And unfortunately, as I look around Christianity, Bible-believing Christianity in America, many believers are struggling with the practical application of loving your neighbor. Whether we come from different neighborhoods, different settings, if we use different vocabulary to describe what we're trying to do, we struggle with issues that you're going to address during this conference, justice and mission. And so I pray that you will be blessed as you open up the Word of God together. And I pray that you will be blessed as you hear from other brothers and sisters from other parts of the body of Christ as we talk about how we might honor Jesus Christ together. Here in Baltimore and many places where we serve the Lord, there's opportunity for us to glorify God as we seek to love our neighbor. I hope you will be challenged. I hope you will meet a new brother or sister in Christ. And again, on behalf of the more than 500 churches of the Baptist Convention of Maryland and Delaware, welcome to Baltimore.
So now I'm going to invite up Pastor George Hopkins, who spoke at our last ethnic. He's going to introduce a speaker, and you can have a seat as he does that. Well, good morning. I have the wonderful opportunity to introduce our speaker this morning. And worship was a distinct, clear reminder that unless issues of justice starts with the victory we find in Christ, it only leads to bitterness. And so with this introduction, I'm going to start with, I can say a lot about her, but I'm going to start from the perspective of Christ. Nikki Lerner is a daughter of God who has been anointed to bring people together across barriers that we have formed in our own brokenness and sin. And she's able to clearly communicate, because of what God has deposited within her, God's love, God's hope, and God's truth to people from various different backgrounds. I have the privilege of calling her not just my sister in Christ, but a sister in ministry and a sister in life. And I believe that all of us are here today because we're supposed to be here to receive. And so, Nikki, I believe the Lord, before the invitation was extended, has been preparing you to speak to us this morning. And so, without any more time being used introducing you, I want to welcome, if you could join me in welcoming Nikki Lerner.
Man, it is a good day to be alive, isn't it? Okay, that was 7 of you. Don't be that person. You're that person who didn't respond to that when it's like, can I pray for you? And you're like, no, I'm good. I have my full. Thank you. I'm good. Isn't it a good day to be alive? Oh, my goodness gracious. You know, it's a good day to be alive, and I got to be honest, I feel like this is the best time in history to be alive. Isn't it awesome out there? It's awesome out there. Oh, my goodness, it's awesome out there. People are mad at each other. Yeah. The church is still segregated racially. Awesome. Right? We still don't quite know what we're doing. Yes. What a great time to be alive. Social media is bugging out than ever before. Isn't it awesome? Doesn't it just fill you with grace and truth and love? Yeah. Isn't it a great time to be alive? You know why? Because this is what you asked for. Isn't it? Because I bet you have spent time like this. God, use me. Oh, God. Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You don't know what hallowed means. Father, God, use me. God, may I be a light to the nations. And you can't talk to your neighbor. I'm talking about myself, by the way. But you know what I'm saying? Like, isn't this what we asked for? So, do you find yourself complaining more? Or do you find yourself meditating on ways that you can be light? Because this is what you asked for. You asked, God, use me. You know what he said? Yep, there you go. Go do it. But then you're like, well, Lord, wait, let me fast for 40 days. Let me fast for 40 days and decide if you want me to do ministry cross-culturally. God, I'm going to fast for 40 days and pray. God, do you want me to cross cultures? Lord, do you want me to be generous with my life? God, do you want me to do things that scare me? I just don't know, God. I mean, come on, just be honest with each other. We don't have a whole lot of time today, right? Let's just keep it real. Isn't it kind of like that? Right? I know it's like that because here we are at this wonderful time to be alive, right? And I think sometimes the struggle that we feel, even as people who follow Jesus, is that we see it out in a world that's lost, but then we kind of come to church and we still see it. Ugh, that feels weird, right? I mean, doesn't that feel kind of creepy? You're like, but I thought this was the light of the world, right? And that's why we're like, what is going on, God? What is going on? But I guarantee you, I'm going to tell you right now, the first place to start is with yourself. Check yourself. What are you praying? What are you doing? What are you singing? You know, I was sitting here during worship. Thank you all for worship, by the way, worship team. Gosh, I was sitting here, I'm listening to all this stuff. There's a slide. Hey, Liam, do you guys still have that slide? I'm not familiar with the song, but it said, Jesus, 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 something about the fear bowing. What song is that? Oh, good. Okay. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Are you experiencing that? Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Are you experiencing that? Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Sometimes I think we sing stuff like that, and we're like, yeah, Lord, yeah. And he says, here's what I want you to do today. And we're like, oh, whoa. No. Make the darkness tremble over there. I'm going to sit over here and pray. Right? Like, I got, like, oh, Father. You know, like, but, like, do you realize some of the stuff we sing sometimes is dangerous? Don't you know it's dangerous? I surrender some. I surrender all the stuff that makes me comfortable. But, I mean, we got to keep it real. We got to keep it real. We have to start with us. We have to start with us. This is the best time to be alive because this is what we asked for. So let's do it. Let's do it. And when I say let's do it, let's not wait for other people to do it. Nobody's coming, by the way. Do you know that? Nobody's coming. Nobody's coming to fix the world. Nobody's coming to fix our politics. Nobody's coming to fix the poverty problem. Nobody's coming to fix Baltimore. Nobody's coming. They never have been coming. You know why? Because we're already here. And I'm telling you, Jesus people, you need to remember what is inside of you. Paul says that the very same power, that raised Christ from the dead. Okay, I'm going to give you 20 seconds. You let that blow your mind for 20 seconds. Go ahead. Because don't we read that fast? The very same power that raised Jesus Christ from the dead is the same power that is alive in me. Got it. What? You know how crazy that is? The very same power that raised our Lord from the dead, like raised a dead man, is alive. Alive in us. That is stupid. I mean, seriously, is Scripture still blowing your mind? That is crazy talk, isn't it? Little old us? Yes. So nobody's coming because we're already here. We're already here. And it's time. It's time for all of us to be generous with our life. All that stuff we sang this morning about fear, bow, chains, bow, something else, bow, like all of that, right? All of that. Don't wait 6 months from now for fear to bow. That's a present song. Now. Right now. Right now. So if we were at a retreat that I would lead, I would lead you through an hour of writing in a journal. What are you afraid of? What scares you? What are you afraid of? Do you know? Do you have the courage to write it out? Do you have the courage to say, you know what? God, I know you've called me to justice and mission, but honestly, I don't feel like I have a voice because I'm white. I'm going to go there today. I'm scared. I'm scared of people questioning my heart. I'm tired of people thinking I'm a racist. I'm just trying to learn. Nobody will teach me. I'm scared. I'm scared. I'm scared to change the structure of my church so that people that don't look like me can come and feel welcome. I'm scared because I'm afraid of the doors closing, if I'm honest. I'm afraid of the budget dropping. I'm afraid of people not coming. I'm afraid of people feeling alienated. Do you have the courage today to write that out and give it to the Lord? Because I guarantee you, if you're honest with yourself, He will give you what's true. You know what's true? There's no mistake in your culture and your color. White people. I'm talking to you first today because you get left out on this side of things. God made no mistake. And the reason you're in this room and you have the call to justice in mission is because how God made you, white and all, is exactly what is needed right now in order for you to be light in dark spaces, right next to your non-white brothers and sisters who say, come on, come on. You have the courage to face your fear. Because if you don't, it doesn't matter how many times you sing, fear, bow, chains, bow. It's not going to happen. And then a year from now at this conference, we're going to be wondering, wonder why things haven't changed. We're just scared. For some of you, you're in a culture group that is non-majority, and your fear is something different. Your fear is, I really want to help teach people, coach people, and what to do, but I'm really afraid that my culture is going to think I'm a sellout. Why are you helping them? Why are you saying anything? Why are you doing that? You don't have to, girl, you don't have to. That's not your job. Really? I'll be darned if somebody takes away my power and my call in this fight for justice and racial reconciliation. I will be darned if somebody takes that away. Ain't nobody taking that away from me, right? Because let me tell you that the way that you've been made, particularly if you're non-majority culture in this room, is exactly what God intended for such a time as this, in this beautiful time that we get to be alive as Jesus people. Doesn't that excite you? Like, there's no mistake. God made no mistake with any of you. And if we don't start there, we cannot move forward. If you don't know what you have, you will not value it. You don't want to share it, right? You won't give the gift of yourself if you don't think you're a gift. The life of Christ in you is a gift. It is the gift in itself. So give it generously. It is like us entering into what the Bible calls the suffering of Christ. You've heard that before? Like we enter into the sufferings of Christ. And in this work on racial reconciliation, justice, and culture, we all carry our own burden and our own suffering. The great thing is, for those of us that know Jesus, we get to enter into suffering. Doesn't that sound exciting? No, thank you. All right, no, thank you. Nobody wants to enter into suffering. But we get to, right? In my pain, in my fear, in my shackles, in all of this, I get to extend grace to you. I get to show you one more time when I'm tired what needs to happen. I get to have conversation and ask you again about your culture when I'm frustrated because you don't hear me. We get to enter into the suffering of our God so that we might identify with him even more. Oh man, it's a good time to be alive. Isn't it a good time to be alive? It's exactly what you asked for. Yes, I love it. So you might ask yourself, because we don't know each other, what do you know about all this? So, like I said, I had the privilege of working to build a ministry of over 17 years at a church right up the road as a worship pastor. And it's an intentionally multicultural church that is focused around building bridges into our community. And I've seen a lot over the last 17 years. I've learned a lot. I've seen a lot. And one of the things I love is the beauty of a diverse space, the beauty of a multicultural church, the beauty, like we get, isn't there a lot to learn? Like we have so much to learn, all of us. We have so much to learn. I'll never forget the first time that I had an older Korean gentleman serving in my ministry. And he was probably in his 60s, maybe 70s. And in Korea, he was 목사님, he was a pastor. And so I remember the first time I met him, I was like, hey! And I run over to him and I just hug him, I'm like, hey, so glad you're here, because that's me. I'm like, so glad you're here. And he's like, how you doing? And so afterwards, I was talking to one of my friends who's Korean American, and he says, yeah, they don't really do that in Korea. They don't? They don't really do that. I'm like, okay, well, what do they do? He's like, well, here's what you would do. When you see somebody that's older than you, you would bow, and you wouldn't look them in the eye, and you would, 안녕하세요, 목사님. And that's pretty much, oh. Thank you. So next time I saw this guy, Pastor Soul was his name, I walked up to him, and he was like, because I'm tall. And so I'm like, 안녕하세요, 목사님. He goes, oh! And he goes, like, yes, right? But you just learned so much, and we built a bridge that day, he and I. We built a bridge, and the funny thing was, that's how we would connect with each other every time. After I would go, 안녕하세요, 목사님, and he would just, which is really great. But I love the beauty of that, because that is the place where you're doing life together as a community, where you are now starting to embrace each other's culture, where he's willing to share with me, I'm willing to share with him, right? Because we love each other. And that is why I believe that this mission that we have been given by Jesus starts with people of faith. That's not going to happen at Verizon. Right? That's not going to happen. Let me tell you, that is not going to happen down at the Korean-owned shop down the street. With me and an old Korean man? It's not going to happen. Right? It happens because Jesus is the center of that community of faith as it is learning to live and move and breathe with one another, right? That is why the multicultural church is so important. That is why in 2019, it is not okay anymore for us to only do ministry with people that look like us. Now I'm not saying, some people say it was every church called to be multicultural. I would say yes, because I believe it's the heart of God. But if you are in an ethnic church that serves an ethnic community here, I would even encourage you and say, you need to be worshiping with other people too. Right? I mean, take God out of it. It's a good idea. Have you seen it out there? It's a good idea, right? But more than that, it is God's heart. So every time that you enter a space and you only see people that look like you, something's wrong. Something is wrong, I'm telling you. something's wrong. And I believe we get so used to just worshiping with people like us that we literally think it's okay. Like, we don't poke it. Do you poke it? We don't poke it. So check this out. In Revelation chapter 7, we have our only model of worship in the Bible, in the New Testament. Okay? I mean, if you look, there's no, like, in the Gospels, like, you'll see Jesus with his disciples singing a hymn. They're like, oh, they sang a hymn, they went on. But like a worship service, right? People come together. And I'll tell you what it's not. This is not the vision. John says, and then I looked, and there it was, a crowd of too many people to count. And they were there in white robes. And at 10 a.m., the white people started, and then they finished at 10:50. And then at, come on, you know I'm right. And then over here, the African American church started, and they started at 11-ish and went until 6 p.m. and then and didn't want to stop. And then the Hispanic service started in the basement of heaven. And they sang in Spanish, and nobody else bothered them because they didn't understand. It doesn't say that. Doesn't say that? Don't take my word for it, by the way, because it could say that. No, it doesn't say that, right? What it says is, the vision is, I looked, and it looked like this room. That's the vision. That's the vision, right? I looked, and there were people from everywhere. Every tribe, every nation, every tongue, every language, and you know what they were doing? They were all centered around Jesus, and they were worshiping. And they said, salvation comes from, what? Salvation comes from our God, not your God and the God of the black people and the God of the Korean people and the God of the Vietnam. Our God. It's a good day to be alive. Isn't it a good time to be alive? Oh my goodness. So I'm going to let you know that anytime you come together with people that are different than you, you can guarantee that God is pleased. You may not be able to say that for everything in your life. But with this thing, you need to know that God is pleased. Justice should never exist apart from Jesus. Justice for believers should never exist apart from Jesus. He is our mission. And I think our challenge right now in the church is, are we willing to practice justice as Jesus said we should, not as the world says we should? Because remember, we can certainly find practices from the world that are good, right? We can. But if it is disconnected from Jesus and how he has asked us to practice the mission, it's nothingness. It's nothingness. Because remember, he said in John 15, apart from me, you can do nothing. Right? We can never separate justice and Jesus, ever, people of God. We cannot do it. He is our mission. We only know mission because we know Jesus. Remember that. And so because of that, we must do this work as he has asked us to do. Then the next question will be, well, then how is that? I'm going to read you scripture that we always hate to read. Here's one way. This is found in Ephesians chapter 4, okay? Think about your mission. Think about justice. Paul says this, always be humble and gentle. What? But we talk about justice here, Lord. always be humble and gentle, people of God. He's not talking to an unbelieving world. Us, always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other. Be patient with each other. Oh, I don't like this part. Making allowance for each other's faults. I kid you not, it's in here. I'm not making this up. It's Ephesians chapter 4, okay? This is the practice of justice for believers. I'm sorry. It says, make allowance for each other's faults because of your love. He doesn't just say, yeah, this is a good idea, just go do it. He says, no. You know how you can do it? Because you love each other, right? That's the greatest command. This is what else he says. Verse 3, make every effort. Right, like, I tried to talk to my friend, but they thought I was a racist, so I'm done. Is that every effort? No, come on, you get your hand slapped, you get back in there. You can do hard things. You're still living. You did a hard thing, right? My friend don't understand me one more time. If I tell them one more time about what Black Lives Matter means, yeah, get back in there. Get back in there. Be patient. Why? Because that is the practice of justice through the eyes of Jesus. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. You can bind something together with peace? It says, for there is one body, one Spirit, just as you have been called to one glorious hope for the future. That's exciting, right? Because Jesus calls us into justice, and then he tells us how to do it. But we don't always like the how. We don't like that practice. It's a lot easier sometimes to just scream at somebody your point and run off, right? But that's not the way of Jesus. That is justice that is not connected to Jesus. This is how he says. I'm going to tell you another way he says to do it. Oh, man. It's hard stuff. Thank you. This is found in the book of Galatians. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, depending on your translation, faithfulness sometimes, right? Self-control. Justice connected to Jesus. I believe that this is what will mark our generation in the church. These things. That justice will happen connected to Jesus, because these things will be the mark of the believers. Doesn't that just resonate with you when you think about it, when you think about the person of who Christ is? These are the things that will mark this generation. And it's not something we have to hope for, because the scripture says, if the Spirit of Christ is living in us, then these things come out of our life. Justice in mission must be connected to Jesus. He is our mission. We only know justice because we know Jesus. Earlier in the book of Ephesians, Paul says this. Oh my gosh, this book is so awesome. I hope scripture still blows your mind, guys. Oh my goodness. Crazy stuff in here. He says, you are members of God's family. So all of you that feel like you don't belong, you belong here. You are members of God's family. Together, we are his house. Together, not separate. Together, we are his house. Built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, and the cornerstone, the mission, is Jesus himself. We are carefully joined together in him, becoming a holy temple for the Lord. The promise of God. I want you to be excited today, because this is the best time in history to be alive and to know Jesus, because we have the answer to this one, y'all. We may not have the answer to a lot of things, but this thing, we have the answer to. But justice can never be separated from Jesus, and he cares about our practice of justice. So, make sure that this generation of believers is marked by the practices of Jesus together. Thank you.
All right. Can I have a music stand if it's possible? All right. Man, what an honor to be introduced by Jenny, crazy middle-class Asians. Some of you didn't get that. That's okay. Crazy Rich Asians was a big deal because it's the first film in 25 years that had, thank you, a majority Asian cast representation. Some of you know, might not know this, but we call Crazy Rich Asians in the Asian context, Yellow Panther is what we call it. It's our version. Hey, what a privilege and an honor to be with you. I've got 45 minutes, and I want to grab that time because I want to be able to worship, read scripture, encourage us together. I thought I would just share a couple more things in addition to what Jenny shared. So I was also born in Seoul, South Korea, immigrated when I was 6 years old. My parents were both born in what is now called North Korea. That's a different sermon in itself, but it's very humbling and amazing and mind-blowing for me to know that my father was 6 years old when he fled south from a small little village outside of a city called Pyongyang. And when you ask my father, where were you born? He'll say, I was born in Korea because there was only one country during that time, and then a war broke out. Last year, it stunned me. Last year, my father shared with me, he's 82 years old. He shared with me for the very first time that he had spent some time in a refugee camp when he was a young boy, separated from his larger family. And I was so stunned by this. And I asked him, why did you not ever tell me this story? And what he told me was so interesting. He said, some things are so painful. And it reminds me about a conversation that I don't think we have enough in the justice conversation. And that's the conversation of trauma. And how is it that we engage trauma? How do we continue to minister in the midst of trauma? Not just those that we serve. I'm actually speaking about you. I'm speaking about us collectively. And so I immigrated when I was 6 years old to the United States. My wife and I, we've been married now for about 22 years. Min-hee, my wife, is a marriage and family therapist. Pause for dramatic effect. It means that she wins every argument in our home. It's not even funny. I don't know why you're laughing at my trauma. We just talked about this right now. So you might not know this, but obviously the Bible is a very important, critical, essential book for us as Christians. But therapists have a very important book as well. It is incredibly intimidating, robust, and thick. It's a book called DSM. So a couple of you who might be therapists or you know therapists, it stands for Diagnosis Statistics Manual. It's a very intimidating diagnosis book, and I find it very unfair that when my wife and I get into a discussion, which is a pastoral word for saying a fight, she grabs her DSM book. Like, it's just not fair. She'll grab her book and she'll say, Eugene, hold on for a second. Oh, Eugene, it says here that you're wrong. And so she wins again. My wife and I, so we have 3 children, and gosh, what a season for us. 3 children. We have 2 kids in college. I know some of you are thinking, wow, Asian genes are amazing. We love it, Asian genes. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this phrase, like there's black don't crack, Asian don't raisin, and then there's white, no, there's nothing for you, I'm sorry. And our youngest is 15 years old. He's a sophomore in high school. And so in about a couple of years, we'll be empty nesters. And so we're really praying and dreaming about, Lord, for the remaining days, weeks, months, years of our lives, what would you have for us? And what an amazing invitation for us to consider, for each of us. Lord, what is it that you would have for us? This is how I'd like to spend the next 40 or so minutes with you. It's going to be, I don't know, both intense and encouraging. And one of the things that I want to just put out from the get-go is I don't know your context. It would be silly, nonsensical for me to assume that I know your respective context. And so you have to do a little work on your own to say, how do I translate this into my context? And my hope is, of the numerous things that I hope to share with you in our limited time, my prayer is really simple. Lord, may there be one thing, Holy Spirit, that you would convict, encourage, exhort, challenge my brothers and sisters here. Not everything will apply to you, but my prayer is may there be one thing that speaks to you in some way or the other. And we're going to be reading from the Old Testament, from the book of Amos. And so if you have your Bibles with you, I want to ask you to turn with me to the book of Amos, chapter 5, verses 21 to 24. The book of Amos, chapter 5, verses 21 to 24. And so I want to speak to you about 3 things, to speak to you about the larger work of justice. And then I want to speak to you about 3 additional things, speaking to you as justice workers, as followers of Jesus. Okay? 3 things from a larger conversation of justice, 3 things about you and about me, about us as individuals. So here's the book of Amos, chapter 5, verses 21 to 24. I'm actually going to read a version called the Message Translation. And I think it's particularly powerful with this particular section. So Amos chapter 5, verses 21 to 24, listen for God's word. I can't stand your religious meetings. I'm fed up with your conferences and conventions. I want nothing to do with your religion projects, your pretentious slogans and goals. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes, your public relations and image making. I've had all I can take of your noisy ego music. When was the last time you sang to me? Do you know what I want? I want justice, oceans of it. I want fairness, rivers of it. That's what I want. That's all I want. Hey, see you guys next year. I mean, that reading just speaks and preaches for itself. Now, let me just assume that not all of you might be super familiar with the book of Amos. In fact, if you just heard what we just read in Scripture, it sounds really standoffish. It sounds really overly judgmental. And so it really matters that you understand the context of what's going on, because it'll make that much more sense. So for those that might not be familiar, let me spend some time, some minutes, explaining to you about Amos, about the contextual background during this time, and then we'll read it again, and then we'll get into what we can glean as organizations, as churches, about the work of justice, and then what it means to us as justice workers as well. Now, Amos, if you need to kind of park your brain in a historical framework, I want you to imagine yourself somewhere around the 7th and 8th century BC. Just to be general, let's say 750 BC is when Amos is at the crux of his public work as a prophet. Now, it's really interesting because in today's world, when you mention the word prophet or prophetic, it's typically mostly seen in an incredibly positive light. And sometimes I actually think we're doing a disservice to the prophets that have come before us, including in the scriptures, because today we almost commodify that word prophet or prophetic. So to give you an example, when you tell someone, man, that person is prophetic, it is really seen in a positive, praiseworthy manner. While that person is so prophetic, we don't realize in the Old Testament especially, to be a prophet meant you were hated. It meant you were misunderstood and vilified. It meant that there were literally death threats against your very life. Which is the reason why if you were called a prophet back then, you were very quick to say, don't call me a prophet. You looked at your children and you said, you can do anything but don't be a prophet. It was seen in that way. Now, Amos, interestingly, like others in the scriptures, he wasn't born a prophet. And so it's really interesting and important for you and I to realize that we're necessarily not born into something. We need to have our moments of revelation where we respond to the work of the Holy Spirit. So what did Amos do? Well, so 750 BC, he was born in a small town called Tekoa. Again, I don't know your context per se, but Tekoa was a very small, obscure town, 12 miles, approximately south of a larger city called Jerusalem. Now, he had a job. He had two jobs, actually. He was a shepherd, and he was a farmer. So in addition to not wanting to be a prophet, if you were a parent back then, you aspired for your kids to have a better life than yourself, and you would say to them, don't be a shepherd or don't be a farmer. Because there was a social hierarchy of significance and importance, which is so interesting again that Jesus reveals the birth, or God reveals the birth through shepherds. So here's Amos. He's a shepherd and a farmer. And as a farmer, he specialized in something called sycamore figs. And he was part of a farmer's market, if you will. He had a business. So if you know anything about Business 101, you would take your goods and you needed to take it to customers, something about market demand requests. And so he would take it to the local farmer's market in Tekoa. But because he wanted his sycamore fig small business to prosper, he realized that he needed to get a larger market, if you will. And so, in addition to the farmer's market at Tekoa, he began to travel from small town to small town in the southern region, which is where he was living in. But eventually he realized that he needed to travel to other places. So if you look at the map in the end of your Bible, you realize that there is a long strip. He's in the southern region. He also travels up north to the northern region. The southern region is led by a king by the name of King Uzziah. Up north, it's led by a guy named King Jeroboam. And as he travels, he begins to see things. Now, we live in a world today where we have access to the world through our smartphone. Back then, this was likely the first time that Amos travels outside of his particular context. And as he travels, he begins to see things for the very first time. Now, during this particular historical context, there was incredible prosperity up north that folks may have heard about but never necessarily saw with their own eyes. And so as he travels up north, not only does he see the opulence and wealth, he also sees what oftentimes people that are wealthy or rich or privileged sometimes choose not to see, and it's the who's not. So as he travels, he sees both, and it begins to disturb him and disrupt him. And what's interesting is that what upsets him even more is that he realizes that there are religious people who believe in Yahweh, who believe in God, who are choosing to apply false, erroneous theology to explain the who's not. And that's what really begins to upset him. Now, I think as we're doing justice work, there's work that we do in intersection and engagement with the larger culture and world. See, as Christians, I want you to realize we don't monopolize justice work. We don't monopolize it. For us, what's unique is the why we do what we do. For us, it's part of our core identity. But as we do justice work to the larger world, we should not ignore the importance of prophetic justice work to our own tribe, to our own churches. And so here's Amos. He begins to realize, yes, there's injustice, but there's also injustice festering in the religious mindset and worldview, and he begins to speak about these things. Now, before he speaks about these things, he gets disrupted. He can't sleep. He's having dreams. He's having revelations. God begins to disturb him. And this is so interesting and so relevant to our world today. Why? Because as Christians, if we're all honest, we tend to be inclined and attracted and enamored by a gospel that comforts us. Now, it's not a bad thing. We all need to be comforted. But if we ignore the fact and the truth that the gospel not only comforts us, but it also disrupts us. It disturbs us. See, the truth is we need both in our lives. But in a consumption, consumer-centric entertainment model, what ends up happening is if we're not careful, we simply begin to pimp out a comfortable version of the gospel. So when you circulate that and cycle that, not just for one Sunday, 2 Sundays, but 52 Sundays, year after year after year, that becomes the normative to the point that when you speak about a gospel that's also challenging and disruptive, you become someone that's an annoyance to the church. See, we need both. So Amos is disturbed, and God begins to stir and shake him up. And after a while, he has these dreams, and somewhere in this mix, he gets called into prophetic work. He goes to the temple up north, led by a priest by the name of Priest Amaziah, and it's in that context, he says, God speaks through Amos, speaking to Amaziah, the other leaders, the other priests, and he says, I can't stand your religious meeting. I'm fed up with your conferences and conventions. I want nothing to do with your religion projects, your pretentious slogans and goals. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes. Your public relations and image making, I've had all I can take of your noisy ego music. When was the last time you sang to me? Do you know what I want? I want justice, oceans of it. I want fairness, rivers of it. That's what I want. That's all that I want. Now, you see, it's not that Amos, or God speaking through Amos, it's not that Amos is saying that gathering together and singing songs and having slogans and having names, it's not that God is saying this is all rubbish or wrong. But ultimately, if it's self-serving, or if it's serving a commodified version of God that's palatable to our appetite, God is saying that's rubbish. So in other words, I would say that I'm not trying to knock on the organizers of this conference. I'm not saying that this conference is bad in itself, but if we come and we get speakers and breakout speakers and good music and phenomenal musicians. We have phrases that we use, and yet we leave this place and it hasn't necessarily both comforted, encouraged, challenged, and disrupted us, and we're provoked to live our lives in a more honoring, holistic, holy way to Jesus. Then what Amos is saying is, this right here, it's a show. It's a show. And if it's a show, what are we going to do? Let's put on the best show that we can, because that's attractive. So Amos is saying, God isn't impressed with your shows. He will not be mocked with our shows. So he sends the prophet Amos to speak not just to the world, but he's speaking to the priests, the believers who echo, who lift up the name of Yahweh and say, you've got it all wrong. So let me encourage you with some language or examples, because I think your work is very important. Not only do you and I need to be sharpened, but I think we also have the burden and responsibility to encourage others in the church, not just prophetically, but pastorally, both. We need both. So we need to be given examples and tools and language and a fresh imagination of how we can exhort the church. So the first thing that I want to share with you is that we need to remind people that justice work is not a peripheral, tertiary, secondary. It's not even a conference. Now, I know why we're doing this, but there's something dangerous if we silo, compartmentalize justice into a conference or just a weekend. Now, I know you're living it out on a regular, daily, weekly basis. Thank you. But what we have to remind the larger capital C church is that justice work, the call of justice, it's actually part of discipleship. If you were to ask me right now, what kind of conference is this? This is not a justice conference. This is a discipleship conference. It's a worship conference. See, I get really, really concerned when I see like different versions of the Bible. And obviously in the last 10, 15, 20 years, you've seen this incredible, rapid rise of different kind of marketed Bibles. You have a men's Bible, you have a women's Bible, and then you have a justice Bible. And I get where it's coming from, but it's really, really, really dangerous when we're compartmentalizing certain things. We have a young Bible, we have an intellectual Bible, we have an Asian Bible. No, we don't. But you see what I'm trying to say? There's something incredibly dangerous about that. We have to normalize what is biblical, that the work of justice is part of our core identity as followers of Jesus. Now, if you're not convinced, let me give you an example. On this pulpit, let's just use your imagination and pretend there's a box on this pulpit. Maybe the size right here. Now, I know we're not supposed to put God in a box, but for the sake of this convenient illustration with my limited budget and imaginary box, I want you just to say that this box represents God. And inside this particular box represents the attributes, the characters of God. Which is why if I were to extract love out of God's character, you and I would be furious, because how can we speak of God apart from the love of God? I know this is a very collaborative conference, but I'm sure that if I were to extract love and say God is not love, you would tell the organizers, never invite this angry Asian man back again. If we were to extract grace out of God's character, let's be honest, the only reason why you and I are able to be alive and to worship and to serve and to breathe is because of the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. I know it's not popular in our world today, but if we were to extract the word holy or holiness from God's character, I love how Isaiah, in his human finitude, trying to encapsulate, articulate the holiness of God, the only thing Isaiah can do is repeat himself. You are holy, holy, holy. So my question to the capital C church, as we seek to both pastorally and prophetically encourage our brothers and sisters, is what happened in the church that we've extracted justice out of God's character and called it an agenda, a social issue, a social justice issue, a political issue, a liberal issue, a POC issue, and the list goes on. Now, I'm not saying that it's not messy, but something went very bad when we've extracted justice out of God's character. It's a part of the work that we do, and I know it's exhausting. And I know we need to learn to take care of ourselves. We'll talk about that. But part of the work that we need to do is the part of the education for our fellow capital C church, where we're reminding them the words of Scripture, because it's not man-made. If we simply read the Scriptures from cover to cover, we know that God has a deep, deep heart for mercy, justice, and compassion. Isaiah 61:8, I love this very short verse. I, the Lord, love justice. One of the ways that I like to articulate this is something called the whole gospel. The whole gospel. And what does the whole gospel mean? Because I feel like we need to rekindle our love, our fascination with the whole gospel. What is the whole gospel? So the whole gospel, I believe, means that for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, so that no one would perish, but as we place our trust in Jesus, that we would experience life and life abundant, that we would experience flourishing. I believe what the whole gospel says is that Jesus saves. That he saves, he rescues, he calls broken, sinful, warped up men and women like you and I. And I pray that in the church, as we're having, and in the larger culture, lots of very intense conversations, as believers of Jesus Christ, I pray that you and I would never relinquish that message of the whole gospel that Jesus saves. I don't know if you remember that moment, that season, that conference, that camp, that Sunday, when you had an encounter with the living Holy Spirit. You can't let that go. I was 18 years old when growing up in a family that had lots of pressure, including the pressure to go to church, but it was in the summer of 1989 as an 18-year-old that I met someone who introduced Christ to me in a very fresh way. And I'll never forget this. And I don't ever want to forget that as I go about my ministry and my life as a follower of Jesus. I met a gentleman by the name of Armando Gonzalez. Armando Gonzalez was a Mexican custodian who worked at a small little deli that my mother had her shop at a larger building called IBM in Sunnyvale, California. My mom was hustling, leaving the house at 5 a.m., doing her breakfast or sandwich shop, and then coming home exhausted. But the summer right before college, she asked me, Eugene, I need you to help me at the store. I didn't want to, but I had to because she's scary. And I had no idea that in that summer I would meet Armando. Sometimes when we look back at our own story, it's tempting to embellish our stories a little bit, if we're honest. But I look back at my life and I really, really wonder if I labored through 4 years of Spanish with Mrs. Nicora in order to hear the gospel from Armando. Armando was very limited in his English. And he would come to me every day. We became friends, and he would say, Eugenio, which is my name in Spanish, Eugenio, tú necesitas Jesucristo en tu corazón. Eugene, you need Jesus Christ in your life. And he would say, ¿Quieres aceptar a Jesucristo en tu corazón? Do you want to accept Jesus? And every single day I reveled in saying, no gracias. No thank you. And yet, as we began to continue to build relationship, he would share one verse with me every single day. Eugenio, Jesús le dijo, yo soy el camino, la verdad y la vida, le contestó Jesús. Nadie llega al Padre sino por mí. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. And somehow, in the privacy of my bedroom in that summer, I made a decision to follow Jesus. The whole gospel states that Jesus saves. May we never abandon this. Now, the thing is this. We have to be careful that as we claim onto this, we need to also know that the whole gospel is not just that message. It's beautiful and profound. And yes, it saves, but the whole gospel is so beautiful, so magnanimous, so transformative that not only does it have the power to change lives, it has the power to change our culture and our larger world. That's the power of the whole gospel. So in other words, if we simply reduce our faith in Jesus to a personal relationship with Jesus, it really becomes about me, myself, and I. My church, my quiet time, my surroundings, my loved ones, and we have no vision of collective human flourishing. We have no sense of what it means to love our neighbors. If we're honest, in our minds, I really wonder, to love our neighbors somehow feels so tempting to love people that look like me, think like me, feel like me, worship like me. And I know it's so hard to hear, even vote like me. So challenging, but that's literally what Jesus meant when he said, love your neighbors. To love all, because every single person embodies the image of God. So in other words, if we have a vision for collective human flourishing, it means, yes, your life matters, but it also means the world matters. It means Baltimore matters. It means different zip codes in your respective city and my city matters. It means that reconciliation matters. It means that black and brown bodies matter. It means that the poor, the migrant caravans matter. It means that every Me Too story matters. It means that even in our world today where it feels so uncomfortable talking about these in these circles, the unborn or preborn, it still matters to God. That's what it means when we say that we have an imagination rooted in the person of God for the whole gospel. That's one. And I just really have 10 minutes left. So here's number two. Justice as mission is so important in our cultural context today because it's not exclusively the only, but I believe it is one of the most significant ways that we represent and bear witness to the gospel of Christ in our world today. In other words, it brings a level of credibility to the message that we're saying. See, one of the reasons why, as the capital C church, we have such limited influence speaking about reconciliation, as our sister Nikki mentioned earlier, is because as we look at our churches, we've lost our credibility. So we're speaking about these things and we don't know that we're hitting a gong. You see, justice work in all of its messiness and honesty is one of the most important forms of evangelism today. Now, I've been in Seattle for 22 years, And in 22 years, I want you to know I have never, ever met a single person that has not heard the name of Jesus. Even in one of the most progressive, however way you want to define that, the least church-going cities in America, I've never met a single human being that has not heard about Jesus. Now, I'm not saying that it's accurate, but they've heard something about Jesus. And as a result, they're very cynical, closed-minded, sometimes adversarial. In fact, I've realized that in order for me to meet neighbors in my city that I love, I have to be very careful how I articulate the question, what do you do? And it's not that I'm timid about being a believer or a pastor. It's just that I want to have a chance of having a conversation. See, in the beginning, I learned when they say, hey, what do you do? I would say, I'm a pastor, and it's amazing. They're trying to be polite, not show any body, face, emotions, but you can slowly go, help me. They're backing away. If some of them are brave enough to say, well, what kind of pastor? So I was ordained through a denomination called the Evangelical Covenant Church. That word evangelical is the worst cuss word in Seattle. So when I say evangelical, game over. So now when people ask me, so what do you do? Because I want a chance to be a good neighbor, I often say I'm a teacher. And you know, like I'm a progressive. All progressives love teachers. And they'll say, oh, you're a teacher. What do you teach? I'm like, I teach spirituality. Oh! That's so cool. What kind of spirituality? I teach about Yeshua spirituality. Yeshua? What kind of spirituality is Yeshua? The Aramaic word for Jesus. You see what I'm saying? Like, there's such a closed-mindedness. All they can think about is the hypocrisy or duplicitousness, fair or not. That's what people think because we've lost credibility. Our commitment to justice, to collective human flourishing, our commitment to the common good of our neighborhoods and cities, it bears witness to the power of the gospel. Now, here's the third thing about larger systemic things, and it's this. Sometimes I'm sure you get this feedback. The number one response that I get about justice work is, they'll say, Pastor Eugene, I get where you're coming from, but I just disagree. I really believe that when we're talking about justice, it's a heart issue. It's a sin issue. And if hearts change, then everything will be okay. And how can we as Christians disagree with that? Of course it's a sin issue. But oftentimes I feel like we say that, and altogether we're either indirectly naive or we're choosing to be ignorant about the dangers and the reality of real systemic institutional racism. Both matter. Now, there is a concern about highlighting just systemic, cultural, nebulous racism or sin and altogether ignoring the reality of how important our hearts and lives are. I'll give you an example. I want to spend some time here because this is really critical. If God were to answer all of our prayers about everything that's ailing in your beloved city of Baltimore and beyond, like we pray, and because of this conference, like all racism ceases, all inequity regarding gender, even regarding sexuality, regarding whatever it might be. Because ultimately, we believe there has to be a level of fairness, right, for everybody, regardless what your theological positions might be. And so let's just say overnight, all systemic institutional war and conflict and violence on the streets and gangfare and corporate greedy people, all of that ceases. And not just in Baltimore, let's just say that peace reigns throughout the earth. Wow. Wouldn't that be amazing? God answers that prayers. We would all rejoice. But here's the reason why hearts matter. Because if hearts don't change along with these things, come at 9:01, it continues again. See, as Christians, that's part of our unique message. Both matter. So what about this then? What about systemic and structural change? Let me give you an example. This is quite uncomfortable, but it's okay. Can I ask you to come up? Do you mind volunteering? Yeah. I hope you don't mind. Wait, what's your name? Tyler. All right, Tyler. Have a stand right here. Let's see. Can you come up if you don't mind? Yeah. Thanks for praying for me earlier. Can you just stand right there? Can you come up if you don't mind? Yeah. All right. So let me give you an example, because a lot of folks don't understand how systemic structural racism works. So I've asked these three brothers. It's a little uncomfortable because you can probably tell, hey, I'm not trying to pick on white brothers or anything, just trying to make an illustration here. You know, when human beings get together, so we've got Jay, David, and Tyler. Did I get that right? Whew. And so, you know, when human beings gather together, when you speak with sociologists and anthropologists, they'll tell you that what inevitably happens, sometimes well, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, is that culture begins to shape. That's what happens. Your small group at your church, like people can gather together, your pastors might not even be involved, they shape some general trajectories, and it's amazing how a culture in that small group comes about. So think about that on a larger macro level. So let's just say the four of us, we gather together, we become friends, and as a result, we end up creating culture, a way of doing things, a way of meeting, a way of talking. We create music, we create language, we create government, we create governance, we create education. Think about macro level. Now, if we're all honest, the temptation for us in our sinfulness is that we're going to create a culture that best reflects us. Translation is that it most advantages and favors us. That's just human nature. That's not white, yellow, black. It's just human nature. We're going to create things that are going to benefit us. And after a while, we have blind spots. We can't see it because that's the world and the lens by which we see things. So when you say, man, there's structural racism, I would say, what? Look, we're thriving. Peace? I don't want peace. This is peace. Don't rock the boat. So some of us Christians might say, well, you know what, Eugene, this talk about structural, institutional injustice is really bothersome. It's a hard issue, and I agree. So if Tyler were to encounter Jesus, here it is, you encounter Jesus, it's great, his heart changed, but what ends up happening is that it doesn't necessarily speak to the reality that pre-encountering Jesus, there's been culture that's been created. It doesn't address it at all. So let me give you a horrible example, has nothing to do with these brothers, okay? Horrible example in the Jim Crow era. The Jim Crow era, I chose not to show this picture because it's just too triggering and it's traumatic. So I want to be careful. But there's an image that some of you may have seen, and it's from the Jim Crow era, where you've got the KKK in their complete white hoods meeting and assembled for a picture in front of a church with the humongous sign, Jesus Saves, in the background. So you might say, well, if that person on the front row meets Jesus, well, praise God, but it doesn't address that structural evil institutional racism. So here we are back again. We've all encountered Jesus, but we still have a way of doing things. So like in Baltimore, clearly you know about the history of neighborhoods that basically sought to make sure that certain people didn't get in. Like in Seattle, the most progressive city in America that loves to pat itself on the back. It's amazing. 50 years ago, there are so many neighborhoods that specifically say, you Mongolians, Orientals, Black people, Ethiopians, Jewish people cannot be in this neighborhood. Actual housing covenants. You see what I'm saying? So when we look at this, we realize, yes, how does that change? Hearts change, but we have to also have the courage to address what are the systems that we've created that seeks to favor just me. That's the hard part. See, a lot of us, we like doing compassion ministries. Justice ministry is long and arduous and messy and dangerous. So something's missing here. What's missing? Well, gosh, the kingdom of God cannot be encapsulated just by men. For goodness sake. Right? Something is wrong here. We do an injustice not just to us, but we're doing a grave injustice to God. That's called idolatry. And so I think to myself, Jenny, do you mind? I'm sorry for using you as my token Asian here, but can you guys move up a little bit? Just move up a little bit. Move up. There you go. There you go. But in the back. No, let's cover her a little bit. So we'll say, you know what? Yeah, it's great to have women. Ma'am, do you mind coming up a little bit? Thank you so much. Tell me your name. Jay, all right. Yeah, but if you don't mind, I'm sorry. Just in the back here, right there. And we go, oh man, look how diverse we are. Man. Woo! Woo! So this is messy. And if I've offended, if people are watching online, my name is Dan Hyun. No one knows, man. We all look the same. But you see what I'm saying here? There's just something not honoring of who God is. Dan, why don't you come on up? Because obviously we need people. Now, if you guys can come up a little bit, and if you can spread out, and if you could have come up. And obviously this is incomplete. You know what's complete? Can you guys go over here and turn around at me? Go this way, turn around. Can everyone stand up real quick? Right here. This is it. This is the vision of God. This right here. That's the hard work of structural systemic change. I'll go ahead and have a seat, and let me try to wrap up in the next 2 minutes here. I really want to honor time for other speakers. So let me just finish. Let me just finish with, it's not good, man. Let me just finish with one thing here. Let me finish with one thing that has 7 sub-points to it. Oh, man. So one thing is this. Oh, man. Okay, let me see. What's really important, this is for you. We talked about structural language, imagination to help our churches, our small groups, our communities. This is for us. I think one of the biggest dangers about justice work is that eventually, if we're not careful, we do justice work unjustly. Okay. That's a really hard word for all of us, including myself. So in other words, if we're not careful, we actually end up almost commodifying justice work. We actually profit from the trauma of other people. And this is really hard, because I think we're all learning, but we have to name the importance of the injustice of doing justice work. Now, I think one of the ways that we can do this as an example, to give you a more specific example, our brilliant Nigerian novelist sister by the name of Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi speaks about the way we steward stories. And in her talk, brilliant talk at TED some years ago, entitled The Danger of the Single Story, this is what she says: the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. So as an example, when we reduce, as an example, the poor people exclusively and in totality to their economic situation, we want you to know that God never intended human beings to become our projects. And the way that we do that is that we embrace a commitment to mutuality. A commitment that we're broken, that we need to learn from others, including those that we're coming alongside with as well. I think one of the best ways that we do that, and I say this as a confession to you, is that sometimes when you're doing this work, locally, globally, as a pastor, in our homeless ministry, in Ballard, with the work that we do with One Day's Wages, sometimes I can just lose sight of human people created in the image of God. Sometimes you're tired, sometimes you're angry, sometimes you're hopeless, sometimes you're cynical. And so we stop looking at people. This is why when you look at the ministry of Jesus Christ, the most impressive thing as far as I'm concerned, amazing miracles, but when I read the Gospels, the aspect about Jesus that most captivates me is how, no matter how busy, hurried, pursued as he was, he stops and looks at people in the eyes. It's stunning. It is so stunning how the creator of the world humanizes the human. He stops and looks at people. The woman who's suffering from internal bleeding in the Gospels, which means that she's considered dirty and unclean. She has this illness. No one wants to touch her. She's an oppressed, marginalized person. In her mind, she's working through the crowd, thinking, if only I can touch Jesus. She touches Jesus. Praise God, she's healed. And then Jesus does what? He asks what, if we're honest, we would say he's asking a ridiculous question. He says, who touched me? Now seriously, you think Jesus didn't know? You think Jesus, being that perfect introvert, said, who touched me? Or did Jesus, for the sake of that woman, for the sake of all the men that were present, for the sake of his disciples, for the sake of every single person, did he ask that question to let them know, including this woman, that in the kingdom of God, the king stops and says, I see you. I know what you're thinking. It's not rocket science, but sometimes the most powerful things are actually the most simple things. It's the most simple things. To look at one another, to constantly say, in a world at times where it feels like we're being otherized and villainized and vilified and demonized, to be able to say, even in the midst of disagreements, to say, I believe that you are created in the image of God, and that God loves you. And that might not change everything overnight, but I think it is one of the most substantive, significant, kingdom, godly things that we can do. And so, God, thank you for your Holy Spirit. throughout this day, encourage us. Yes, comfort us, but would you also challenge us to the point that it stirs and disrupts us? For your glory and honor, in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you guys.
I think we all know that everyone's journeys related to the pursuit of justice can look a little bit differently. And so there are some of us where a big event signifies the start of a true pursuit of justice in the world and in their lives. But then there are others of us who may be pursuing it consistently over time on a day-to-day basis, maybe without the fanfare. And so could each of you give a little bit of your story, whether there was a verse, a person, a book, a situation that started off your pursuit of justice, or whether it was something that happened over time, so that we can hear a little bit of your story?
So I think for me, I think being Korean American, growing up in the United States of America, there's always the struggle of, what does it mean to be really American, and how do you fit in? And so I think growing up where my parents were immigrants, knowing the hardships they encountered, encountering racism, not on a regular basis, but every once in a while in my life, growing up in Philadelphia, kind of really shaped my understanding of God's role in my family, God's role in my life. And I think there was one formative experience for me where I studied abroad in college. I went to Spain, and I remember there was this young African woman who was riding the subway, and these young Spaniards got on the subway and started graffitiing on the walls, "Get out of my country, black people," in Spanish. And so they got off the subway at the next stop, and I went up to this woman just to make sure she was okay. And there were two things that bothered me about what had happened. The first is that there was such a blatant racist incident right in front of me that happened. But the second thing that really bothered me was that no one on that train bothered to say anything to these Spaniards, to either call them out to say what you're doing is wrong, or even to come alongside this woman just to make sure that she was okay. And so that summer, I started working at volunteering at the UN, doing some research, just trying to understand, for someone who's an immigrant, like, what does it mean for them to have, legal rights and protection. But I also started volunteering at an anti-racism organization called SOS Racismo. And I realized for someone like this woman, or even myself, when you live in a community in which you're the foreigner, or in which you don't really belong, you don't just need legal rights and legal protection. What you need is a community to feel like you belong. And so I think for many of us, especially as we think about justice, I think it's those two angles that are really important. It's the legal, the systemic, the structural issues in which justice can flourish, but it's also about relationships, and it's about community, and it's about creating a sense of belonging that I think is really critical.
I like to tell people that I grew up in a bicultural family, even though we were all African American. It was very strange, actually. My mother, her side of the family, was very diverse. I mean, we had people from everywhere all the time. On my mom's side of the family, my mother loved heavy metal music. I know. She loved heavy metal music, She had an affinity for white guys with beards. I mean, that was my mom growing up. And then my stepfather's side of the family was, all of his family lived in Baltimore City. And from my experience growing up, was a little more very black, ethnocentric. That side of my family did not have any relationships with non-black people, other than people they worked with at the hospital who they just knew were racist. So this was my family growing up. So it was bicultural, unicolored bicultural is what it was. And the thing is that within that family, there was a side of my family where I felt like I belonged, and the other side of my family where I felt like I didn't belong. And I actually experienced a lot of racism within my family because of how I grew up. My stepfather's side of the family at times kept me out by pointing out how I was not black enough to be in the family. So when you grow up like that, you grow up with African American people who can tell you, because of the way that you talk or things that you don't possess at the time, that you don't fit there. But then when you have to go out into the non-African American world and also be told that you don't fit, you go into, like Jenny said, that where do I belong? That's where Jesus found me at 13. I was the first Christian in my home. We'd never gone to church, But I say that story to say that I know what it feels like to not be included. Don't you? Right? I mean, we all know that. And so for me, it's funny, from someone not being in church environment, okay, coming into a church environment where this was even a thing, was like, we have to talk about this? Like, isn't this just a human? So just kind of eye-opening, actually, coming into a church environment. But, we all know what it feels like to be that person. You've been at a dinner party before, and you're sitting at the table, and everybody who knows each other is talking to each other, and, nobody talks to you, and you're like, I'm right here. And then the dinner ends, and everybody's like, hey, it was great to be with you. You're like, you weren't with me. I was here, and I was with myself, but we weren't together, right? Everybody knows what that feels like. And so because of that, there is no way anybody could convince me to keep other people out of anything. So that's why it matters to me.
Gosh, I think it began for me as I became a bit more rooted and comfortable with my identity as a Korean American. I know Jenny spoke a little bit about it, but I became a believer at the age of 18. But as I started studying more about my family and my family history and roots, I found out that my great-grandfather was one of the first people to say yes to Jesus in a small little village outside of the city called Pyongyang. Was so captivated by the gospel, he comes home and shares the good news with my great-grandmother. She says yes to Jesus, and our whole household comes to faith. But beyond that, I share that to say, as crazy, because nowadays it's really easy for us to slam and dismiss all missions and all missions work. And I think we have to have the courage to examine some of the harm that it's done, but also to acknowledge that God also worked within that as well. But as I started learning more about that story, I was really stunned that these crazy missionaries, that they were part of this Holy Spirit movement in Korea, where not only did they come bringing the Bible, but they came alongside local indigenous leaders. They helped build the first schools, the first hospitals, the first orphanages. They were out on the streets protesting an illegal occupation by, at that time, the Japanese Imperial Army. And that really captivated my attention. Something about, again, the message of the whole gospel. That really stirred me to be a bit more open to this message of the gospel. And when I spoke earlier about justice work bringing credibility to the gospel, that it's evangelism in itself, that's an example of, again, how that really fascinated a young person like myself.
I would say for me, it's been a series of life kind of experiences. Finding out my mother couldn't have babies in the hospital in Tennessee. She was born in 1931, so when she started having kids in the late 40s, African-American women couldn't have babies in hospitals. Her telling me the story that, the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross on their lawn, and being a young kid, not really knowing what that kind of meant, but knowing it's wrong. When I was 9 years old, we went from Pacoima, which is predominantly a black community, to Malibu, which is predominantly white and Jewish. And I remember being the only black kid on the playground and being called names and the things about me being pointed out, like I was fast and I could do this. So I just became more and more aware. Middle school and trying to date white girls. Back then it wasn't popular. It wasn't cool like it is now, and so there was a lot of rejection. And yeah, I'm still bitter about that. So I don't want to hear you guys whining about, it's so hard interracial dating. Please, fool. But so, and then one of the big highlights was when I was in high school. Some of you know my story, that I was dating a Jewish girl, and her mother basically looked me in the face and said, "You're the nicest guy she's ever brought home. You're probably the nicest guy she'll ever bring home, but you're black." And so then joining the kind of black consciousness movement, back then Public Enemy was big, you know what I mean? So we was fighting the power and all that, and just all these range, getting saved, like my brother Eugene at 18, world being turned upside down, but then being in predominantly white, fundamental, Baptistic, Reformed circles, where it's just those experiences. And then probably the two other experiences that shaped the most is when I was pastoring in the Antelope Valley, having God really speak to me about a matter of injustice for women in particular who had actually had abortions and or considering abortions, that the church I saw standing condemning it but not stepping in and giving the gospel to those who have done it or who are talking about it. And so God led me to partner with some people in the community to start a Christian pregnancy center, and that was a matter of facilitating justice. And then the last thing was meeting Tom Stoll, whose son has autism, and just seeing him come to work with scars, getting beat up by his own son, and realizing that people with disabilities are actually the largest unreached people group in America, and how that's marginalization and injustice, and God just saying, step into the mess. I invite you to come on in and practice justice here and see what that means. So those have been some of the things God's used to bring me into this.
What I'm hearing from our panelists is that there is both a generational line of knowing about injustice or maybe getting displays of justice through our families, but then there's also this societal, cultural context. So in our day and age, with media being so open, cycle after cycle, we see a lot. We are now more aware of a lot of injustices all the time, like I think both of you alluded to. So as Christians in our pursuit of justice and social justice, how can we as Christians and as a body of believers continue to persevere in a culture where it seems like it's a little bit futile? Or can't? How can we persevere as a body of believers, even though our society, it seems like injustices and working for justice may seem futile?
I would encourage us that we have to start somewhere. And the reality is, and you guys know this, is that most of the stuff that we're exposed to, our hearts cannot take it 24/7. And I want to encourage you, you don't have to watch the news every day. I guarantee you'll find out what's going on. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think if we consume suffering 24/7, I think a couple of things happen. A, like VK is saying, we get overwhelmed. And you can feel like, well, what do I do? Nothing feels great, right? And then you lose perspective because everything becomes so large, and then we start to get all up in ourselves like, I have to fix it, right? Rather than maybe asking the question, what could I do today to take one step towards something that's literally right in front of me? So just taking a small step towards something. But also, I think on the opposite end, what it has a tendency to do is to normalize the suffering in the world, where then all we do is scroll, right? My friend Tracy, she gives this great message. She says, we're looking at Facebook and we see, oh my gosh, there was an earthquake. And you sit there for a couple of seconds and then you scroll. Ooh, cat video. Oh, look at that cat. Oh man, that's awesome. Scroll. Oh my gosh, there was a shooting at a club. Oh man. Scroll, right? Oh look, the president's doing something fun. Okay, then you scroll. And so I think what happens is we, in this day and age, we actually have to take ownership about how much information is coming into us. I may be alone thinking about this, but I guarantee you will know what's going on. It will make its way to you, and you will know what to do. Trust the Spirit of God that He is leading you at all times. Okay? He is leading you at all times. And you addressing an injustice could be just being kind to your barista when your drink's not hot. You wanted it 108 degrees, and she made it 106, and you can tell. It's like Eugene was saying earlier, these are actually the opportunities we're missing because we are overwhelmed by floods and shootings right? Because we're like, oh, I don't know what to do. Ask God to show you what is right in front of you today. I guarantee you He will show you. And at some level, I believe that will help us at least move forward so you know that you are a part of justice in the world, even in your neighborhood or even at the grocery store. I think that's what's key to remember.
I'll add a couple things to that. This is such an important question that I actually think that we can devote an entire conversation, an entire weekend on self-care. So statistically, not to discourage you too much, but statistically, there are some researchers that would say that about half of this room will no longer even be active worshipers of Jesus. So minus the conversation about justice, like half of this room, by the latter stages of our life, will no longer be serving or be involved in a church. Of the remaining half, there's some interesting research about what trauma or cynicism does to our spirits. So for my wife and I, one of our prayers is we want to serve you for the remaining days of our lives, but we also want to do it with joy. Because I sense that there are people that are doing discipleship justice work, but there isn't a spirit of joy within our spirits. And again, it's just a hard conversation to have. And so, a couple things come to mind that I think are really, really essential. Again, there's many things, but a couple that I would like to quickly highlight for the sake of time is that may we never replace the primary joy of worship in our lives. I think it's just really important. So even good things, when they're misguided or misrooted, can become dangerous, idolatrous things. I get a lot of flack for saying this, but I think for us as believers, justice work is beautiful, but when it's not grounded in the person and the kingdom of Jesus, for us as Christians, it could actually become idolatrous. So we actually worship Jesus or justice rather than Jesus. So it's really important that, I'll give you an example. I know a lot of folks who do justice work as Christians, but they eventually stop rooting themselves in a local church. Because in their minds, they're justifying, well, I'm doing this work, that's my church. And it's not. Okay? So there's a distinction. The second thing that I would say is, as Nikki was saying, is that you have to be very selfish about self-care. And again, sounds really unchristian, but I actually think no one is actually thinking about your self-care. So you have to be selfish about your self-care. You have to be the CEO of your own personal holistic health, body, mind, heart, emotions. And I tell people, be selfish. Why? Because we need you for the marathon. I know a lot of sprinters. I know some that last the 400 yards, some the 800 yards, but we all know that discipleship, which includes justice work, it's a marathon. And we need to be in it for the long, long haul. 25 years from now, when Ethnos is celebrating its 29-year or 30th anniversary, we need every single one of you here and then plus more. That, for me, is a sign of flourishing, if people are in it for the long haul. Third thing, really quickly, I would say, is learn to celebrate, even the small things. So again, I don't want to paint this broad stroke about Korean Americans or Asian Americans, but from what I know about Korean Asian culture, we don't celebrate too well, right? Am I right, Jenny?
We throw amazing parties. I don't know what you're talking about, but
must be
Just kidding.
East Coast Koreans. I don't know. In the West Coast, all we do is pray. No, but we don't celebrate as well. And I just realized that even we need to learn to celebrate the small things in our lives, but we also need to be the people that celebrate things in other people's lives. Cultivate that culture of celebration, because, man, there is such a heavy, oppressive, adversarial spirit sometimes that we need to not just remove weeds, we need to plant new, beautiful things in our gardens.
When you actually look back at Scripture and you read about the most amazing advocates in the Bible, and I think about, Esther and Moses and Nehemiah, even some of the disciples, the one thing that always strikes me about what they were called to do in that moment and in that time is the fact that they were never called to do it alone. They always had a team. They always had individuals. They always had people that they could depend on for them to fulfill their calling, right? And so I think a lot of times for us, if God is breaking our heart for something, we feel like God is calling us to do something, we feel alone in that calling. But what we don't know is that there are people around us, there are brothers and sisters in Christ within the local church who are actually right there with us, willing to cheer us on. Sometimes it requires us sharing about what God has placed in our hearts to do. And even if you don't find someone to co-labor with, that's fine, because someone else can encourage you in prayer and in reading the Word together and just sharing life together. And so I think for us, as we think about doing the things that God has called us to do, that don't ever do it alone. Always do it in community, and always bring people along on the journey with you, because as much as you're learning and being formed and being shaped, you have the opportunity to shape and form others as they're sharing in the things with you. And so I would say that's one thing, just one encouragement. The other thing I would say is Gary Haugen, who's the founder of the International Justice Mission, said, there's so many things happening in the world that can break our hearts. And just being aware of those things won't change that situation necessarily, but nothing will change unless we become aware of what's broken in the world. So a lot of times being overwhelmed by things, sometimes we don't know what to do, but simply being aware of it, finding out more information, following organizations or people that are working in that area, and getting involved, I think is really important. I've coined this term called the 4 A's of activism. So I think for us as followers of Jesus, we have to go from being apathetic to being aware, and then from being aware to taking some kind of action, and then from taking some kind of action to actually advocating and addressing systemic issues. So if we can be on the trajectory of being apathetic to aware, to taking action, and then actually being an advocate, I think that's a good journey to follow.
I know a few of you have already touched on this aspect, but I'm aware that there may be some people in this room who have come here as the only representative of their church, or maybe they're not even a part of a church, who are seeking to have justice be real in our city in particular, alone. So what types of encouragement can you have for those individuals who are here by themselves, to get plugged in, to have people who are praying for them? And to build off on that, if we're in this room and we're in a community, how can we help support these people who are kind of on their own, and find them? And maybe it's talking to your neighbor, hint, hint. But can you give any advice to those people who may feel alone?
I believe one of the most important questions for us to ask or to answer, well, ask and answer, is what do I want? I say that because I think many times our first step is to define it, to define what is justice. And not only what is justice, but what is justice in my life? What does it look like? How do I know when I get there? How do I know that I'm working towards the right thing? Because I think sometimes we can have the idea of justice and then go looking for it and look for models other places and be like, oh, there it is. That's justice right there. That's what I need to do. But somebody else already did that, right? So for you, define what does God's call of justice look like in my life? What do I want it to look like? How do I want it to express itself? Because then we can focus, right? And this hits to some of the overwhelm, right? Then you don't have to have justice for 45 things. You can, right? You can't work towards justice for 45 causes and do it well. But what you can do is hone in on where is it that Jesus has given me this beautiful heart for justice, and can I focus my energies in that space or with those people? Because if you don't define what this work starts to look like for you, it starts to look like everybody else's work, and we don't need another copy. Somebody's already doing that. And the hardest part for us in the church, I believe, is that we just met, and y'all are already like, I know when you don't want to say something and you look like that. We've become copyists instead of creationists. Everything not everything, that's a broad term. So many of the things that we do, we go looking for it out there somewhere. Wherever out there is. Well, what does our church need to look like? Let's go look and see what the hottest new church is doing, because obviously that's what God is blessing. So if he's doing it there, he's got to do it here. Those of you that work in Baltimore is unlike any other city. It's not just a city. And those of you that are church planters, you come to the city, you don't love the city, you love the people. The city is the people, right? But just remember that these people are different than any city you've ever been to. And if you decided to plant a church in Nashville, those people are totally different than the people in Baltimore, right? That's the beauty of the work. But I think when we define for what's right in front of me, how then do I best move forward? Because then you can start to invite people around you into it. To say, hey, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Can you help me? You know, what do you think about this? What's your expertise? Can you help me? Let's do it together. But I think it's really important for us in this work to say, what is it that I'm trying to do? Me. What am I trying to do, and how is it going to come and express itself through my life and the lives of the people around me? So it's important to define the work. What do you want?
Yeah, so I think I've talked with especially a lot of younger, Asian American students, that a lot of them sometimes come up to me and say, oh, you work at World Relief and you're doing all this stuff, and like I'm studying engineering, and I feel called to justice, but how is that going to bear fruit when I'm going to be an engineer at some company? And so they're like, do you think I should leave and like do something else? And I think sometimes we can get so caught up, like you were saying, Nikki, and just comparing ourselves or feeling like the work of justice means this specific, road to travel. And I feel like God can use all of our gifts in whatever capacities to build the kingdom right here on earth in the places that God has called us to. And so for that, young engineering student who wants to go overseas and, work in impoverished communities, I say, no, like look at the gifts that you have been given. And even if you're called to work at a private company, what can you do to build a culture that is based on kingdom values right where God has called you to? And it could mean within that company, having conversations about the things that break your heart and letting people become aware of those things. It could mean that in your spare time, you volunteer at a local organization that needs your help and your expertise. And so all of these things I think are really, really important is, what are the gifts and the abilities God has given you in this moment, and how do you use those things in the communities that God has placed you in right here and now?
I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure if I understood the question, and that's okay. I'm just going to answer a random question in my head, if that's okay. I heard when people are here alone from their churches, and one of the questions that I occasionally get from folks that I think you said is, how do I help my churches come along when these issues are really, really important? And I would just say that I really think that's part of the ministry responsibility that we get to have. Because it feels at times like an uphill battle to encourage other people to be mindful of this vision of the whole gospel, that justice is not tertiary. And so a couple things come to mind is sometimes I think it's so silly that we're trying to do the work of Christ, the work of the kingdom, and we're omitting the gifts like spiritual gifts. Like we're not praying. And again, sometimes, as I said earlier, it's the simple things that are really profound. And the reason why they're challenges is because we just take them for granted. They're just so simple. But many of us, I feel there have been times in my own life I've been trying to do the work of Christ, and I'm not praying. I'm not in God's word. Eventually, it becomes about me, myself, and I devolve into this savior heroic complex, if you will. So it's a reminder that prayer is so important with all the groups, all the conversations, when you're meeting with your elders, when you're meeting with your pastors. To have conversations is so important. The other thing that I would say is that it's really, really tempting to wear our prophetic hats, to kind of go through our Elijah complex and say, am I the only one? And we become very self-righteous. But in doing so, we end up judging or dehumanizing even the people that we want to come along. And this is what I feel like is happening in our larger rhetoric in our country, where we're having really, really intense conversations about really, really intense things, but it's actually not with people in dinner tables or around fellowships, but it's basically across social media or across whatever it might be. And I find that you never, there's an interesting research going on about how many people change their minds based on these kinds of arguments. So think about if you were in leadership, if someone came to you with a spirit of righteousness or judgment, if that would sound captivating in some way. So this is why I think it's so important that we as Christians, that we understand, Jenny has the 4 A's, because that was her GPA, and, for...
It was not, just to clarify.
I have the 4 P's, which means passing. And so, so for me, I feel like the balance that we need is that we need to balance it's personal, that we're embodying the things that we're talking about, right? That's so that we're not just panderers or not just people that are peddlers of the gospel, but we're embodying it at a personal level, that it's practical, that we're living it out as well in tangible ways, but that we're also seeking to balance the prophetic and the pastoral as well. I've come to realize it's really tempting to wear your prophetic hat, go from place to place, drop bombs, and leave. And you can do it because you have no relationship with the community that you're doing that with. This is why your work is so important. I'm not saying that guest speakers shouldn't be honored in some way, but it's actually kind of easy to come, drop stuff, and then leave. But you're here. You're living in Baltimore. And so those 4 things, I think, especially as you try to encourage, help people with their reimagination of what the gospel can be, is, I think, what we need.
We want to give a few minutes if anyone has any questions for panelists. And if you got the question, you're going to have to show some courage and come up front here. I'll have the mic right up front here. But if you would like, you got open access to them. So
I also want to add, keep the questions short, or Pastor Dan will have an arm.
yeah,
of
the
love.
arm of, at our church, the arm of love might come out at any time. So
I'll just ask my question and sit down. I don't want the arm of love. So one of the things that happened to me not too long ago, I was sharing with some folks earlier, is I was giving, I'm a pastor of a church predominantly white, surprise, surprise. And I was giving a message called One Race, One Blood. And it was about how God created us all in his image, and that there's no difference between us genetically. It's all just skin tone, melanin, and that. And there was an African-American gentleman who'd been coming to my church, and I pointed out that he and I could have a blood transfusion, and he got offended, I found out later, because I had singled him out, as opposed to giving the message that I was trying to give, that we're all the same. I singled him out because of his race and his color. And while I went and apologized to him, he never returned to my church. So I guess my question is, how do we as white brothers and sisters become aware of our privilege and check it so that we don't make those mistakes?
Yeah. You know, I'm going to go a different angle on this. So, because I think some of this, I think it's been said by our two main speakers so far, and you're going to hear this in the breakouts. This is messy, and I have a word for ethnic minorities. We were grafted in by grace, by forgiveness. So one of the things that's really popular, as Pastor Cho said right now, is to sound off. And if we're not careful, we will do to white people, at least verbally, what has been done to ethnic minorities for decades. So what I would say to you, brother, is that you're going to make mistakes. Nobody likes to make mistakes, but there's no condemnation for you. And that God is for you, and nothing's going to separate you from the love of God in Christ Jesus. And I just want to make sure that when we, like you said, when we go on this justice thing, that it doesn't turn into vengeance, and that we're still gospel saturated, and we make, you said something so powerful in Ephesians, that we bear with one another's weaknesses. You cannot do this work and then expect for people groups to get together that have never gotten together and not step on each other's toes and sin against each other. I want to make you an absolute prophetic promise. You ready? If you do justice work, you will be sinned against. If you do not want to be sinned against, don't do justice work. And when you do justice work, you're going to need to forgive a lot of people, and a lot of people are going to need to forgive you. It's messy. And so I just want to invite us, that's the glory of the gospel, is that we get to get into this thing, do our best, make mistakes, learn from them, but be forgiven and be restored. That's really powerful.
Let me also add, white people, don't run from privilege. Now, hold on. I'm about to explain myself. I want you to think about the privilege you've been given as something that's man-made. Privilege is now the, nastiest cuss word ever, right? As soon as you hear it, you're like, no! Like, no, right? But check this out, okay? Your privilege was not given to you by God, right? You guys know that. But it was man-given. And so I want to encourage you that you need to see what has been given to you by the world in the tool, as a tool in the hands of the Spirit of Christ. Because I actually think it's a work of evil for those of you that have, those of you in majority culture that have that kind of a privilege, systemic privilege, to run from it, because then you can't use it to bless anybody. So think of it as a tool in the hands of Christ, for those of you particularly that do justice work, that you come into a situation with an awareness of what you represent, whether you have done anything or not. It just is. I don't like that that's true, but it just is. So when you go into a situation like that, just know that sometimes you have to go after people, and it's okay, and that it actually might bless them. So I would just say that don't run from it. Ask Jesus how God can make you a person of grace, of empowerment, of learning, given what you represent in our country at any given time. I'm really sorry that happened to you, by the way. And also just know that sometimes people are just mad, and it has nothing to do with their color. Right? And you work in a church long enough, you're like, you may have just got an angry brother, you know what I'm saying? It had nothing to do with him being black. He just needed a hug. So I say that to say, just make sure you see the situation for what it was.
I'm sure there's other questions, and so please come up front, and Pastor Dan will hook you guys up. But I just want to address one thing, because I think the hard part is that no one monopolizes the absolute right answer. So it is messy, and I know we've said that. But having said that, I think there is a posture of humility that's encouraging. Your willingness to seek out after that person. Because in leadership, I think the great danger is to be abusive in our power. And so all of us, we wield influence, so we have to really steward that influence with Christ-like spirit, even if it's not a full reconciliation, right? We seek reconciliation, but I would say, is there awareness of the fact that you've offended or hurt? Is there maturity to apologize? And so for that reason, I think the panelists were saying it's an encouraging, even if it didn't necessarily come to the absolute fruition that we want. But I think there's also this importance about, are we willing to add new tools in our toolbox? So as a 48-year-old, I went through seminary many, many, many years ago, and I realized that the toolbox that I had 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, doesn't necessarily equip me for some of the complexities and challenges of ministry today. So I have to continually live into this definition of a disciple. Am I learning? And so to speak to maybe a question that you asked is, so as a pastor in Seattle, and also as I've traveled a little bit, I've heard people use that sermon, and I agree with it theologically. Not that you've added to this, but an addendum that I hear that I think can be dangerous is that I've heard a lot of people, particularly folks that are white, say, but I don't see color, okay? And I know it comes, and I'm not saying that's you, but I know that it comes from a good place with good intent. But I think when you tell people, particularly those of color, saying, I don't see color, what you're basically saying is, I don't really see you. I don't see your experiences. I don't see your past. I don't see your story. And I always tell people, I think we should actually embrace and accentuate the diversity of our color, because it is with intent and sovereignty that God made us who we are. Okay? Now, I mean, we know that it's been twisted and abused to create hierarchy and significance, right? We know that. But then to go to the other extreme to say we don't see color, even when it's coming from a good place, I would say actually does more harm. Okay? So just as an FYI about that language.
Hi there, good afternoon. My name's Crystal. I live here in Baltimore. And I'm curious to know about any of your experiences either growing up in or being affiliated with a church that has a strong immigrant community, and how you've had conversations about reconciliation in a community maybe where there's been trauma. In my experience, I come from a Nigerian background, and my parents came at a young age. I was born in the States. But it's kind of hard to have a conversation about outreach and reconciliation with people outside of the community. I think get it intellectually, like we love people because Christ loved us, but in terms of like being intentional to reach out to the broader community, it can be kind of a a hard lift. So just wanted to see if any of you have anything to share in that regard.
So I grew up in Northwest Philly in a Korean immigrant church, actually. And so when we started first going there back in the early 1980s, it was maybe like 30, 40 people. And now it's like one of the largest Korean American churches in Philadelphia. So it's, I don't know, around 4,000. And so it's interesting being and having been growing up in this Korean American church culture. If you ever see Kim's Convenience on Netflix, it's a new show. It talks about like what is this Korean, church immigrant culture actually like, and it tropes on kind of stereotypes around like what the culture is actually like. And I think one of the greatest challenges, well, growing up in that culture, I learned that the Gospels focus on the four spiritual laws, and we're all about missions and evangelism and all of these things. And I think being in that community, it's created social comfort for an immigrant community that is trying to kind of make it and deal with the hardships of living as ethnic minorities in a predominant culture. So I think the church has played that role of creating social cohesion and resources and friendships, I think, in a community that has been, somewhat marginalized. At the same time, I think my fear of a lot of immigrant churches is that because the churches have been used to provide social cohesion, that if these churches don't engage in the larger community, then I think sometimes the impact that these immigrant communities can have on the larger culture can be lost. And I say that because I think especially, and I would say coming as a Korean American community, our desires for comfort and for wealth and to make it in this country is a predominant theme, I think, among a lot of immigrant communities. But at the same time, because we know what it feels like to be marginalized and to not feel like we fully belong, I feel like we can actually be the best bridge builders as well to actually reach out to communities that are consistently marginalized, that are consistently oppressed, and say, hey, I know exactly what it feels like. And even though right now I'm not, we're still living and living out this journey, that there are intentional ways that we can actually be bridge builders and build relationships outside of our own ethnic communities. And so I think it is a challenge, I think, especially when I look at this church that I grew up in. There's an older generation, there's a younger generation of Korean Americans that knows what it feels like to grow up in this country. And I think that generation is really starting to ask the question, what does it mean for me to be Korean American, but use that identity to actually impact the wider culture around me? But it's a constant struggle.
Any other panelists have any quick word on that question? We've got time for one quick more question here.
Hi, Psalms. My name is Psalms. We were talking earlier about doing justice unjustly, and one of the things that I think can come out of a conference is like a spark of wanting to do justice. So we come out of the gates guns blazing, and we'll do ministries and start X, Y, and Z's without really taking the time to stop and listen. So can you talk a little bit practically about what does it look like to invite the people you want to serve to the table? Why is that important?
Yeah, I think it's a great conversation to have. There's books and resources out there, and more conversations are happening because in the church, the capital C church, including the evangelical church, mainline church, the conversation of justice has become elevated, which is a good thing. I'm grateful for our spiritual fathers and mothers that have gone before us that kind of paved the way when there was no attention, no conversation about this. Things like this kind of conference didn't really exist many years ago. But because of that, I think out of our good intent, sometimes we're doing things in a sloppy way. We're doing things where we're commodifying it. We're doing things where we're turning people into projects a little bit. And I would just say, just having the conversation, are we exemplifying dignity? Are we exemplifying mutuality? Are we exemplifying integrity? So I'll give you an example. Because One Day's Wages does work around larger global development issues, water, maternal health, and child death. And it's really hard, painful stuff. And a sociologist, there's a few organizations, I'm not sure who owns it, but they began to term or coin this phrase, the pornification of the poor. And it's meant to be really provocative. And the reason why they began to articulate this was there was this unaccountable usage of photos and stories that clearly lack any sort of dignity for the people that were being served. Sometimes you have these Christian organizations basically putting images of African kids on their t-shirts, basically saying, you know what, they signed a waiver. And I would say, I don't think they quite understood what they were doing when they signed waiver. And my question to them is, would you want your kids' photos to be on some random t-shirts in another country? Particularly in a very undignified perspective. So I'm grateful that more and more folks are beginning to have that conversation. And so, earlier when I mentioned, sometimes we reduce the poor into projects because we don't have this perspective of mutuality. And so that would be some examples, but for me, it's a commitment as an individual, as churches, as organizations to say, do we care about doing justice, but doing it in a way that we feel is also God-honoring and dignifying of the people that we serve, and always from a posture of humility.
That's good. And I know some of you probably have more questions that you're curious about. I would encourage you, our panel, they're going to be here afterwards a little. If you want to just directly ask them, we definitely want to honor you all the time. Including Van Kim, if I give you one thing you want to say to the group here, not a 10-minute one thing, but like a quick one sentence, one thing, I would love to hear from each of the panelists.
I don't really have anything because I had the privilege of going a little over my time, so I'll just leave it at that.
Stay curious about everything and about everyone. Ask more questions, make less statements.
Bill Foster once said that charity is giving someone crumbs off your table, but justice is providing a place at the table. And I think for us, as followers of Jesus, we should be in the work of providing space at the table.
Mine would be deal with fear, because I think shame and guilt and embarrassment has killed its hundreds, but fear is killing its thousands in regards to justice work.
I think one thing that I'm learning from listening to all of you and all the conversations that I've had is that there are opportunities right already in our lives to start acting out justice for God's kingdom. And so keeping my eyes open, and I think the other thing is staying humble enough to pray that God would use us individually and corporately, as opposed to just selfishly doing whatever we think is what justice looks like. So,
can we thank our panel for their wisdom and time?